Alarms screamed through my ship before I even opened my eyes. Red light filled the chamber. The hull groaned like a wounded animal, and I felt the deck tilt beneath my feet. My name is Vrektal Zorn Ashbourne, and in that moment, my ship was dying around me. We had been tracking a signal near the edge of a system marked on old star charts as empty. No colonies, no warnings, just silence, the kind of silence that should never be trusted. My crew and I were Creosidians, and where I come from, silence usually means something is waiting to strike. We were wrong about what was waiting. A wall of debris tore through our shields without warning. Not weapons fire, not an ambush, just old wreckage, drifting where no wreckage should have been, moving faster than our sensors predicted. By the time the collision alarms finished their first cycle, half our engine section was already gone. I grabbed the edge of my chair as the ship spun. Sparks rained from a shattered console. Somewhere behind me, Doran, my second in command, was shouting orders that no longer mattered, because the ship that was supposed to carry them out was falling apart. "Vrektal," he called out. "We are losing pressure on Deck 3. I did not answer him right away. I was doing what every Cryosidian is trained to do since birth. I was calculating our odds of survival, the same way my ancestors calculated odds against sandstorms, venomous packs, and each other. On my homeworld, hesitation is death. Calculation is life. The numbers were bad. Our escape pods were damaged. Our long-range beacon was destroyed. And the nearest world capable of supporting life was small, backwater, and according to our intelligence reports, home to a species so weak that our scouts had laughed when they first read the file. Humans. I remembered the briefing clearly, because I remembered laughing too. Thin skin, no claws, no venom, eyesight worse than a newborn Cryosidian pup, lifespans barely long enough to finish basic training by our standards. My superiors had shown us images of human soldiers wearing thick armor just to survive impacts that any Cryosidian youth could shrug off bare-skinned. We had been told this species had somehow built ships, cities, and an empire of sorts, despite being, by every measure that mattered to us, fragile. "There is no fortress out here to save us," Doran said, gripping a support beam as another tremor rocked the ship. "Only that." He pointed through the cracked viewport toward a small human science vessel, drifting far too close for something that size to be safe near a battle zone. It had no weapons that I could detect. Its hull was thin, almost delicate compared to ours. It looked like something that would break if you breathed on it too hard. I almost laughed, even with death staring at me from every failing system. "They will not help us," I said. "Why would they? We are not their kind." I believed that completely. On my world, no warrior helps a wounded stranger from another pack unless there is something to gain. Strength is currency. Weakness invites nothing but predators. I expected the human ship to either flee, or worse, to see us as an easy kill while we were vulnerable. Instead, something happened that I still did not fully understand, even hours later. The small ship changed course. Not away from us, toward us. "They are hailing," said Ressa, our communications officer, her voice tight with confusion, repeating the same message, audio only. "Play it," I ordered, mostly out of disbelief. A voice came through, calm, clipped, human. "Unknown vessel, this is Science Transport Halden's Reach. We are reading massive hull failure and life signs in distress. Do you require assistance? Please respond." Doran actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "Assistance," he repeated. "From them." I did not laugh. Something about the voice unsettled me more than the collision had. There was no hesitation in it, no calculation of risk, no question of whether helping us was worth the danger to their much weaker vessel. "They do not know what we are," I said, thinking out loud. "They do not know we could crush their ship with a single working weapon system." "Then they are foolish," Doran said. I was not so sure anymore. Our ship shuddered again. Worse this time. Emergency lighting failed on half the bridge. I heard someone behind me collapse, gripping a burn along their arm from an exposed conduit. Time was running out, and pride was a luxury none of us could still afford. "Respond," I told Ressa. "Tell them we require extraction. Warn them what we are." It felt strange to say it, warning weaker prey that predators needed their help. Ressa transmitted the message. I expected fear in the reply. I expected the small ship to turn and run once they understood what kind of species they were reaching out to. The response came back almost instantly. "Understood. Beginning approach. Stand by for docking clamps. Medical teams are already suited up. No fear, no hesitation, no demand for payment, or alliance, or surrender. Just help, offered freely, to something that could have killed them without effort." I stared at the viewport as the small vessel closed the distance, its lights steady despite the debris field around it, despite the obvious danger of docking with a ship twice its size that was actively falling apart. Every part of my training told me this made no sense. Every part of my culture insisted that only the strong deserved rescue, and only fools risked themselves for strangers who could crush them. And yet there they were. "Brace for docking," Ressa called out, her voice shaking slightly, though whether from fear or disbelief I could not tell. I felt the moment their ship connected to ours, the vibration running through the damaged hull plating beneath my boots. Metal met metal, with a sound like a held breath finally released. For a heartbeat, everything went silent, except for the groaning of dying systems around us. Then the airlock hissed open. I straightened instinctively, every muscle prepared for combat, prepared for betrayal, prepared for anything except what actually happened. A human stepped through first. Not a soldier in heavy armor, not a warrior bristling with weapons. Just a person, wearing a simple pressure suit, helmet already retracted, revealing a face far younger than I expected leading any rescue. "My name is Grace Bennett," she said, her voice steady, despite standing in front of creatures 3 times her size, with claws long enough to open her chest in a single motion. "We have medical support behind me. Please tell us how many injured you have, and where." I looked down at her, at the softness of her skin, at the obvious fragility of her frame, at the complete absence of fear in her eyes. Every instinct told me this species should not exist, let alone thrive among the stars. And somewhere beneath that instinct, quieter but growing louder with every second, was a different thought entirely. Maybe I did not understand strength at all. "Doran," I said slowly, without looking away from her, "lower your weapon." He hesitated, staring at me like I had lost my mind. "They came for us," I said, "knowing what we are." I turned back to Grace Bennett, this small, fragile creature who had risked everything for beings her own intelligence reports must have warned her about. "We have wounded on deck 2, I told her, my voice rougher than I intended. "And deck 4. She nodded once, already turning to relay the information to her team, moving with a calm efficiency that felt entirely wrong for someone facing apex predators from a species that had never lost a war. I did not know it yet, standing there on my dying ship, watching humans move without fear among monsters. But this moment, this single act of help, offered without hesitation to something stronger, faster, and more dangerous than themselves, was going to break everything I believed about what made a species worth fearing. The rescue teams worked fast, faster than I expected creatures with such limited physical strength could move. They carried equipment I did not recognize, tools that hummed with quiet energy, stabilizing wounds with a precision that suggested extensive practice, though practice on what kind of injuries, I could not begin to guess. I watched one of them, a man introduced briefly as Owen Hale, kneel beside one of my wounded crew members, someone easily capable of crushing his skull with a single careless movement. Owen did not flinch. He simply worked, applying something cool and stabilizing to a wound that would have taken any Cryosidian medic twice as long to address. "You are not afraid," I said to him, unable to stop myself. He looked up at me, sweat on his brow from the effort, but his hands steady. "Should I be?" he asked, not defensive, simply curious. "We could kill everyone on your ship without effort," I said honestly. "You know this. Your reports must have told you this. Owen shrugged slightly, returning his attention to his work. Reports told us a lot of things, he said. Didn't say anything about leaving people to die because helping them might be inconvenient. I had no answer for that. On my world, strength decided everything. Weakness was corrected, or removed, or ignored, depending on whether it threatened the pack. Never protected, never risked for. Grace Bennett approached me again, her tablet glowing with information I could not read. Your engine core is unstable, she said. If it goes critical, it will take out both ships. We need to move your crew across before we attempt any repairs. You would let us aboard your vessel, I said slowly. Fully armed, fully capable of overwhelming your crew. Yes, she said simply, as if the question itself made little sense to her. Why? She looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. Because right now, you're not a threat, she said. You're people who need help. We'll worry about everything else later. I did not understand her logic. Not then, but something about the certainty in her voice, the complete lack of calculation behind her kindness, unsettled something deep inside me that had never been unsettled before. By the time the last of my crew crossed into their vessel, our ship's warning systems had reached their final stage. Through the viewport of the human ship, I watched my vessel drift silently, still burning in places, still leaking atmosphere into the void. We lost it, Doran said quietly beside me, staring at the wreck of everything we had known just hours earlier. We lost the ship, I said. Not everyone aboard it. He looked at me strangely, as if hearing something unfamiliar in my voice. I kept watching the humans move around their cramped vessel, tending to my crew, sharing supplies meant for far fewer people, never once suggesting we owed them anything for it. For the first time since encountering the wreckage that nearly killed us, I found myself thinking about something other than survival. I found myself wondering what kind of species chooses to risk everything for strangers who could have killed them, and calls it nothing more than the obvious thing to do. I did not know yet how deep that question would take me, but standing there, surrounded by humans who showed no fear of my kind, I understood one thing clearly. Everything my people believed about strength was about to be tested. And I was not certain anymore that we would win. The human ship, Halden's Reach, was smaller than anything my people would trust for deep space travel. Every corridor felt narrow, every ceiling low enough that I had to duck my head to avoid the support beams. Yet the ship moved with a quiet confidence, its systems humming steadily, despite carrying nearly triple its intended passenger load. I sat in what they called the observation lounge, a small room with a wide window looking out into open space. My crew, those who could walk, were scattered around me, watching the humans move past with quiet efficiency. Nobody spoke much. We were guests in a place none of us understood, aboard a ship crewed by a species we had been trained since birth to underestimate. A young woman entered carrying containers of something warm. She introduced herself as Claire Sutton, part of the ship's support staff. She placed the containers on a low table without hesitation, despite Doran watching her with obvious suspicion. "It's not much," she said, "but you've been through a lot, and empty stomachs make everything worse." Doran did not touch the food. Neither did I, at first. On my world, accepting food from a stranger, especially one from another species, was almost unheard of. Poison was a common weapon among rival packs. Trust was earned through generations, not given freely to survivors pulled from wreckage. "You expect us to eat this without knowing what it contains," I said, more statement than question. Claire tilted her head slightly, genuinely puzzled by the concern. "It's just soup," she said. "Vegetables, some protein, nothing exotic. Our medical team already checked what your biology can safely process. Wouldn't want to accidentally poison the people we just rescued." The casual way she said it, as if the very idea of intentionally poisoning us had never even crossed her mind, struck me harder than any weapon could have. I picked up the container and drank slowly. It was warm, simple, and completely unremarkable, exactly as she described. Doran watched me for a long moment, before finally reaching for his own. They are either very foolish, he muttered quietly in our own language, or completely without fear. Or both, I replied. Later, once my strength had returned enough to move without assistance, I asked to see more of the ship. Grace Bennett agreed to guide me herself, despite the obvious risk of walking alone through narrow corridors with a creature capable of ending her life in seconds. "Doesn't it concern your commanders?" I asked her as we walked, allowing me this kind of access. "You mean because you could kill most of the crew before anyone stopped you," she said, not slowing her pace. "Yes." She glanced sideways at me, something almost amused in her expression. "If you wanted to hurt us, you could have done it the moment you boarded," she said. "You didn't. That tells us more than any weapon scan could." I considered that answer carefully. On my world, mercy shown once meant nothing. Strength was proven through repeated dominance, not a single choice. Yet here, a single choice seemed to carry weight far beyond what I expected. We passed through a section of the ship dedicated to what she called the archive, rows of data terminals containing records, histories, images from what she explained was Earth, their homeworld. I paused at one screen showing images of human cities, vast structures reaching toward the sky, populated by countless individuals moving in coordinated patterns like a single living organism. "Your cities," I said. "They are large." "Some of them, yes," she said. "Billions of people, all crammed together, mostly getting along." "Billions," I repeated, "without constant conflict for territory." "There's conflict," she admitted. "Plenty of history full of mistakes. But most people, most days, just want to live their lives without hurting anyone." I studied the images longer, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with everything my culture had taught me about survival. On my world, large gatherings of Creocidians, without strict hierarchy and territorial boundaries, would collapse into violence within days. Strength determined who led, who followed, who bred, who died. Cooperation existed only in small, tightly controlled groups bound by blood or conquest. Yet here were images of entire cities, filled with strangers, functioning without constant combat for dominance. How, I finally asked, does a species this fragile avoid tearing itself apart, surrounded by so many strangers with equal claim to resources? Grace considered the question seriously, which I appreciated. She did not dismiss it as foolish, despite how foolish such cooperation would seem by my people's standards. "We didn't always avoid it," she said. "Our history is full of wars, some of them terrible. But somewhere along the way, enough of us decided that working together got us further than fighting each other. Once that idea took hold, it kept spreading." "An idea," I repeated. "Not strength, not dominance. An idea decided your survival." "I suppose so," she said. "Ideas turned out to be pretty powerful once enough people believed the same one." We continued walking, passing a section where several crew members were repairing damaged equipment, working in coordinated silence, each person handling a different task without any single individual directing every movement. I recognized Owen Hale among them, along with a man introduced as Peter Doyle, and a woman named Laura Whitfield, all moving with practiced efficiency despite obvious exhaustion from the earlier rescue effort. "None of them are the strongest among your crew," I observed. "Yet they accomplish tasks that would require significant individual strength on my world." "They don't need to be the strongest," Grace said. "They have tools, training, and each other. Strength stopped being the deciding factor a long time ago for us." I found this both fascinating and deeply unsettling. My entire understanding of power revolved around individual capability. The strongest warrior led, the strongest pack survived. Weakness was either eliminated or subjugated, never elevated to equal standing through cooperation and shared knowledge. Later that day, Doran found me standing alone near the observation window, watching stars drift past in silence. "You have been quiet," he said, settling beside me with obvious effort, his wounds still healing from the crash. "I have been thinking," I admitted. "About what?" About everything we believed before today, I said. About what makes a species worth fearing or worth respecting. Doran frowned, clearly troubled by the direction of my thoughts. They are still weak, he said, though his voice carried less conviction than it had aboard our dying ship. Their bodies could not survive what ours survive daily. Perhaps, I said, but their bodies were never their true weapon. Then what is? I thought of Grace's words, of billions of strangers cooperating across cities larger than anything my people had ever built, of ideas spreading and holding an entire species together despite obvious physical fragility. Numbers, I said slowly. Cooperation, ideas that spread faster than any physical trait could evolve. Doran said nothing for a long moment, staring out at the stars alongside me. That is not a weapon our people understand, he finally said. No, I agreed, it is not. That night, if such a concept even applied aboard a ship traveling through endless dark, I could not rest easily. My mind kept returning to images of human cities, of strangers working together, without constant threat of violence, of Grace Bennett offering help without calculating what she stood to gain from it. Everything about this species contradicted what I had been taught since birth. Strength, I had always believed, was measured in claws, venom, resilience of flesh against harsh environments. Yet here was a species that had built something far more resilient than any individual body could ever be. They had built systems, ideas, cooperation that outlasted any single lifetime, any single conflict, any single mistake. I did not yet understand the full weight of what I was witnessing, but I understood enough to know that everything my people believed about Deathworld superiority was built on an assumption we had never bothered to question. We had always measured strength in what a body could survive alone. Humans, it seemed, had spent their entire history proving that survival was never meant to be a solitary pursuit. The following morning, an alert spread through the ship, quiet but urgent, crew members moving with sudden purpose toward the bridge. I followed Grace as she hurried through the corridors, curiosity outweighing caution. "What has happened?" I asked. "Long-range sensors picked up a signal," she said, not slowing her pace. "Matches configuration for another vessel from your fleet." My hearts, all three of them, tightened at once. My people had come looking for us, and they would not be arriving with medical teams and warm food. They would be arriving expecting a fight. On the bridge, the mood had shifted entirely from the calm efficiency I had witnessed since boarding. Screens flickered with data, voices overlapped in quick, clipped exchanges, and every human present moved with a focus that told me this was not a drill. A man I had not yet met stood near the central console, his posture straight, despite the tension in the room. Grace introduced him quickly as Nathan Pierce, captain of the vessel. "Report," he said, not looking away from the main display. "Vessel matches Cryosidian configuration," said the officer at the sensor station. "Larger than the one we pulled survivors from. Weapons signature active." Nathan's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained level. "Distance? 2 hours out, at current speed." I stepped forward, unable to remain silent any longer. "That ship will not be searching for wreckage," I said. "It will be searching for what destroyed it." Nathan turned to look at me fully for the first time, studying my face with an expression I could not immediately place. Not fear. Something closer to calculation, though nothing like the cold survival math my own people practiced. "And when they find you here," he said, "on our ship, will they attack us for having you?" I hesitated, because I did not know the answer with certainty. "They may assume you are responsible for our losses," I admitted, "or they may simply demand our return, expecting compliance. And if we don't comply—" The question hung in the air between us, heavier than anything I had faced since the crash. "Then they will not hesitate," I said honestly. "My people do not know how to retreat from a perceived insult. It is not in our nature." Nathan absorbed this without visible alarm, turning back to his crew. "Options," he said simply. Voices rose around the bridge, quick suggestions exchanged, Contingencies weighed, none of it filled with panic, despite the very real danger approaching. I found myself watching closely, searching for the fear I expected, the fracture points where cooperation would collapse into self-preservation. I did not find them. "We're not equipped for a fight," said Laura Whitfield, standing near a secondary console. "Not against something that size." "Then we don't fight," Nathan said. "We talk first, buy time, see what they actually want before assuming the worst." "And if talking fails?" Doran asked from beside me, his voice tight with old suspicion. Nathan glanced toward him, unbothered by the question. "Then we figure out the next step when we get there," he said. "Panicking now won't help anyone." I studied him carefully, searching for cracks beneath his calm exterior. On my world, a captain facing certain destruction would either fight to the last breath out of pride or abandon the weak to save the strong. Nathan Pierce did neither. He simply prepared, methodically, without wasting energy on despair. "You are not afraid," I said quietly, almost to myself. "I'm plenty afraid," he replied, surprising me with his honesty. "Doesn't mean I stop thinking clearly because of it." That single sentence lodged itself somewhere deep in my mind, refusing to leave. Fear without paralysis, danger without despair, a calm, deliberate response to a threat that could erase every life aboard this fragile vessel within minutes. I had spent my entire existence believing that true strength meant the absence of fear entirely, that hesitation itself was a weakness to be eliminated through brutal training and harsh conditioning. Yet here was a species that accepted fear as simply another factor to manage, rather than an enemy to destroy within themselves. As the ship began preparing for the approaching encounter, I found myself standing at the edge of the bridge, watching humans organize themselves around an impossible threat, with a discipline that had nothing to do with physical strength. Whatever happened when my people arrived, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. The next few hours would test everything I thought I knew about what made a species worth fearing, and what made a species worth trusting. The 2 hours passed slower than any span of time I had ever endured, and I had endured survival trials on my homeworld that lasted for days without rest. Every system aboard Halden's Reach hummed with quiet preparation, though preparation for what, exactly, none of us could say with certainty. When the Cryosidian warship finally appeared on the main display, I felt something twist inside my chest that I did not expect. Not fear for myself, fear for the fragile ship around me, and the strangers who had pulled me from wreckage without hesitation. "That's a lot bigger than the one we rescued you from," Nathan said quietly, studying the display. "It is a battle cruiser," I said, "commanded most likely by someone senior to my former captain. Will they listen to reason?" I considered the question carefully before answering honestly. "They will listen to strength," I said. "Reason matters only if it is delivered by someone they respect." Nathan absorbed this, then turned to his crew. "Open a channel," he said. "Let's see what kind of conversation we're dealing with." The response came quickly, translated through systems the humans had somehow adapted from data recovered off our damaged vessel. A voice filled the bridge, harsh and commanding, unmistakably Cryosidian in its cadence. "Unidentified vessel, you are harboring Cryosidian personnel. Surrender them immediately, or be treated as hostile." I recognized the voice. Commander HFY, known throughout our fleet for a reputation built entirely on unbroken victories and zero tolerance for perceived weakness. Nathan glanced toward me, silently asking whether I wanted to respond. I stepped forward before he could decide otherwise. "Commander HFY," I said, my voice steady despite everything. "This is Vrekdal Zorn Ashborn. My vessel was destroyed by drifting wreckage, unrelated to any action by this ship or its crew. They saved every surviving member of my team." A pause followed, longer than I expected. "Saved you," HFY finally repeated, something almost mocking in his tone. "A species incapable of surviving basic environmental hazards saved Cryosidian warriors." They risked their own vessel to dock with ours while it was actively failing, I said. They treated our wounded without demanding anything in return. Then they are either foolish or they want something, HFY said. Which is it, Vrektal? I hesitated, searching for an answer that would satisfy someone who had never once questioned the foundation of everything we believed about strength. I do not yet know, I admitted, but I know they did not have to help us, and they did so anyway. Silence stretched across the channel, heavy enough that I could feel Doran shifting uneasily beside me. Return our people, HFY finally said, addressing Nathan directly now, and this encounter ends without further complication. Nathan's expression remained calm, though I noticed his hands tighten slightly at his sides. Your people are welcome to leave whenever they choose, he said. Nobody here is holding them against their will, but we won't force injured people back into space before they're ready, regardless of who's asking. You dare set conditions for a Cryosidian commander? I'm not setting conditions, Nathan said. I'm telling you how we handle rescued people. If your crew wants to leave now, they can. If they need more time to recover, they'll get it. That's not negotiable, and it's not an insult either. It's just how we operate. I watched HFY's silence stretch across the channel, clearly unaccustomed to a response that offered neither submission nor open hostility. My entire culture operated on a simple axiom: challenge is met with dominance, or it is met with retreat. There was no third option, no framework for calm refusal, delivered without threat or fear. Yet Nathan Pierce had just done exactly that, and the confusion radiating from HFY's continued silence told me he had no established protocol for handling it either. You will regret this defiance, HFY finally said, though the threat carried less weight than it should have. We will not forget this insult. The channel closed abruptly, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Well, Laura Whitfield said after a long moment, that could have gone worse. It could still go worse, Nathan replied, watching the display as the Cryosidian vessel held position rather than immediately advancing. But at least now they're thinking instead of just reacting. I stared at the screen, processing everything that had just happened. HFY had expected either total submission or open combat. Nathan had offered neither, responding instead with calm clarity that left no obvious insult to answer, yet no capitulation to claim as victory either. You confused him, I said, almost to myself. Confusion buys time, Nathan replied. Time buys options. Over the following hours, the Cryosidian vessel maintained its distance, apparently recalculating its approach now that the expected outcome had failed to materialize. I used this time to speak with my crew, explaining as best I could everything I had witnessed since boarding the human ship. Doran remained skeptical, though even his certainty had begun to waver. Perhaps they are simply too foolish to understand the danger they are in, he suggested, though without his earlier conviction. Or perhaps, I said, danger alone no longer determines how they choose to act. Grace found me later, standing near the same observation window where I had first begun questioning everything I believed. She carried a small data tablet, offering it toward me without explanation. Thought you might want to see something, she said. The screen displayed records from what she called humanity's early history, long before space travel, before advanced medicine, before the cities I had seen filled with billions of cooperating strangers. Images of plague, famine, catastrophic conflict between human factions, entire populations reduced to fractions of their former numbers through disease and disaster. Your species nearly ended itself, I said, studying the records carefully. Multiple times. More than once, yeah, Grace admitted. We came close to wiping ourselves out more than once. Disease alone killed more of us throughout history than every war combined. Yet you continued. We didn't have a choice, she said. Giving up wasn't really an option that occurred to enough people. So we kept going, kept learning, kept trying to do better than the generation before us. I studied the data further, finding records of humanity nearly destroyed by conflicts fought entirely among themselves, brutal struggles that dwarfed anything my own people had faced from external threats. Yet somehow, despite this violent history, humanity had emerged capable of extending help to strangers from another world entirely, without hesitation, without demanding anything in return. Your history is filled with violence toward your own kind, I said slowly. Yet you show no hesitation helping mine. Maybe that's exactly why, Grace said. We know what it costs to turn away from people who need help. We've paid that price too many times already. Something about her answer settled uncomfortably in my chest, refusing to be easily dismissed. On my world, we measured strength purely through survival against external threats, environmental hazards, and rival packs. Cooperation existed only within tightly controlled hierarchies, never extended freely toward strangers, especially not toward strangers from an entirely different species capable of ending you without effort. Humanity, it seemed, had learned something my people never bothered to learn. That strength built through cooperation, extended even toward potential threats, created something far more resilient than strength built through domination alone. Commander HFY will not understand this, I said, more to myself than to Grace. He doesn't have to understand it, she replied. He just has to decide whether it's worth testing. That evening, another message arrived from the Cryosidian vessel, though this time it did not come as a demand. It came as a challenge. HFY proposed a formal encounter, a trial by our own ancient customs, designed to settle questions of strength and dominance without immediate resort to full conflict. A single confrontation, human representatives against Cryosidian warriors, the outcome determining how this first true contact between our species would be remembered. He wants to prove we are weak, I said, reading the terms carefully. Through combat we cannot possibly win by his estimation. Nathan studied the proposal for a long moment before turning to his crew. What exactly are we agreeing to if we accept this? I hesitated before answering, knowing the weight of what I was about to say. You are agreeing to prove yourselves worthy of survival, I said. By Cryosidian standards, refusing this challenge marks you as prey unworthy of continued existence in contested space. And if we accept, then everything your species claims to believe about strength will be tested, I said, not through words. Through action, HFY cannot dismiss or misunderstand. Nathan looked around at his crew, at Grace, at Owen, at Laura, at every person who had shown me since boarding this ship that strength meant something entirely different than what I had been taught to believe. Then I guess we're finding out what we're really made of, he said quietly. I did not know, standing there on the bridge of a ship far too fragile for the danger surrounding it, whether humanity would survive the trial HFY intended to impose. But for the first time since my own ship had shattered around me, I found myself hoping, with something that felt dangerously close to belief, that they somehow would. The night before the trial, if such words even applied inside a ship drifting through endless dark, I found myself unable to rest. My thoughts kept circling back to a single question that refused to leave me in peace. How had a species this fragile survived long enough to reach the stars at all? I sought out Daniel Cross, an older member of the crew, who Grace had mentioned kept detailed records of human history, the kind of records not filled with statistics, but filled with stories. I found him in a quiet corner of the archive room, surrounded by screens displaying images centuries old. Grace said you might answer a question honestly, I said, taking a seat across from him. Daniel looked up, unbothered by my sudden presence despite the obvious difference in our size and strength. Depends on the question, he said. How did your species survive itself? I asked. Not environmental threats, not other species, yourselves. Daniel considered this for a long moment, then turned one of the screens toward me, displaying records of conflicts that spanned generations. Entire regions of Earth reduced to ruin through wars fought over ideology, resources, and pride. We nearly didn't, he admitted. There were moments in our history where enough of us believed destroying each other was worth whatever we thought we'd gain from it. Some of those moments came closer to ending everything than most people realize. Yet you continued. Every single time, enough of us decided that continuing mattered more than winning, he said. That's not something that happened by accident. People made that choice, over and over again, even when giving up would have been easier. I studied the images further, disturbed by the scale of destruction humanity had inflicted upon itself throughout its history. My own people had fought conflicts, certainly, brutal struggles for territory and dominance among rival packs. But nothing on the scale displayed before me, nothing that threatened the very survival of our entire species from within. On my world, I said slowly, conflict is controlled through strict hierarchy. The strongest lead, the weak submit or are removed. This prevents conflict from spiraling beyond what any single pack can survive. Sounds efficient, Daniel said, without judgment, but it also means your whole system depends entirely on whoever happens to be strongest at any given moment, doesn't it? I had never considered this weakness in our structure before, and the realization settled uncomfortably in my chest. If the strongest leader makes a poor decision, I said slowly, there is no mechanism to correct it, beyond removing that leader through combat. Right, Daniel said. We tried that too, for a long time. Strongest person makes every decision, everyone else falls in line. It worked, until it didn't. Eventually enough of us figured out that spreading decisions across many people, even flawed people, produced better outcomes than trusting everything to whoever happened to be strongest that year. You built systems instead of relying on individual strength, I said, understanding beginning to dawn. Exactly, Daniel said. Laws, institutions, ways of making decisions that didn't depend entirely on one person's judgment. Took centuries to get right, and we're still adjusting it constantly. But once that idea took hold, it turned out to be a lot more stable than hoping the strongest person always makes the right call. I sat with this for a long moment, processing everything he had shared. My entire culture measured strength through individual capability, through what a single body could survive and dominate. Humanity, it seemed, had learned something entirely different, that strength built through shared systems, distributed across countless individuals, created something resilient enough to survive mistakes that would have destroyed any hierarchy built around a single dominant leader. This is why Commander HFY does not understand you, I said finally. How do you mean? He expects a single strongest warrior to determine the outcome of tomorrow's trial, I said. He does not understand that your strength was never meant to live inside a single person. Daniel smiled slightly, though there was no humor in it. Guess we'll find out tomorrow whether that matters, he said. I left the archive room troubled by everything I had learned, seeking out Nathan Pierce before the ship's artificial night cycle ended entirely. I found him reviewing the terms of HFY's proposed trial, his expression unreadable in the dim light. You should know something before tomorrow, I said. I'm listening. HFY expects your representative to face a Cryosidian warrior in direct combat, I said. He expects your species to either refuse out of obvious fear, proving weakness, or accept and lose badly, proving the same conclusion through different means. And you think we'll lose? I hesitated, considering everything I had witnessed since boarding this ship. By every measure my people use to judge strength, I said. Yes, no human aboard this vessel could survive direct combat against a trained Cryosidian warrior. Nathan absorbed this without visible alarm, which surprised me less now than it would have during our first encounter. Good thing we're not planning on fighting his way then, he said. What do you mean? The proposal mentions trial by combat, Nathan said. It doesn't specify what kind of contest determines the outcome, does it? I reviewed the terms again carefully, realizing he was correct. HFY's challenge, translated through systems the humans had adapted, demanded a trial to settle questions of strength and worth, but the specific nature of that trial remained deliberately vague, a formality left open for negotiation between commanding officers. You intend to change the terms, I said slowly. I intend to make sure whatever we agree to actually test something meaningful, Nathan said. If HFY wants to know what makes us worth respecting, Direct combat isn't going to show him that, but maybe something else will. He will not agree easily, I warned. Combat is the only measure of worth my people fully trust. Then we'll have to convince him otherwise, Nathan said. Starting tomorrow. I returned to my quarters that night carrying a weight I had not expected to feel. Every part of my training told me this plan was doomed, that HFY would never accept terms deviating from traditional combat, that humanity's fragile bodies would inevitably be measured against Cryosidian strength and found lacking. Yet everything I had witnessed since the crash suggested humanity's true strength had never lived within their bodies at all. I did not know which belief would prove correct when morning arrived, but I understood, lying awake in the quiet hum of a ship built by a species my people had dismissed as unworthy of true respect, that tomorrow would determine far more than the fate of two vessels drifting in contested space. Tomorrow would determine whether everything my people believed about strength was about to become obsolete. Morning arrived, though the word felt strange aboard a ship where light came only from artificial cycles and the endless glow of distant stars. I stood on the bridge beside Nathan Pierce as the Cryosidian vessel opened a channel, Commander HFY's voice filling the room with its usual harsh confidence. "Have you selected your representative?" HFY asked. "Or will you forfeit before the trial even begins?" "We've selected our terms," Nathan replied calmly. "Trial by combat isn't going to happen the way you're expecting." Silence stretched across the channel, heavy with something close to disbelief. "You dare alter the terms of a formal challenge?" "I'm proposing something fairer," Nathan said. "Your challenge was meant to test worth, wasn't it? To determine whether our species deserves respect or dismissal." "That is correct." "Then let's test something that actually reveals worth," Nathan said. "Not brute strength. Something closer to what actually keeps a species alive out here." I watched HFY's silence stretch even longer this time, clearly caught off guard by a proposal that deviated so completely from Cryosidian tradition. "Explain," he finally said. Nathan glanced toward me briefly before continuing. "There's a damaged station drifting nearby," he said. "Old, abandoned, life support failing across multiple sections. We propose a joint rescue operation. Your team and ours, working the same crisis, same time limit, same conditions. Let's see which approach actually saves more lives." I had not known this detail before now, and I studied Nathan carefully, understanding suddenly why he had spent the previous night reviewing old sensor logs alongside Laura Whitfield. HFY's laughter crackled through the channel, sharp and mocking. "You propose measuring worth through rescue rather than combat," he said. "This is not how Cryosidians determine strength." "Then maybe it's time your definition expanded," Nathan replied, his voice steady despite the obvious risk of provoking further hostility. "Because right now all combat proves is who can hurt someone else more effectively. That's not the same thing as who's actually capable of keeping people alive." I held my breath, uncertain how HFY would respond to such a direct challenge to everything our culture held sacred. On my world, refusing traditional combat marked you as weak, unworthy of respect, an easy target for further domination. Yet Nathan had reframed the entire challenge, offering an alternative that tested capability without descending into the kind of confrontation HFY clearly expected to win easily. "You believe your fragile crew can outperform trained Cryosidian warriors in a rescue operation," HFY said, though something in his tone had shifted slightly, curiosity beginning to creep beneath the contempt. "I believe we'll find out together," Nathan said, "unless you're afraid the outcome might surprise you." The insult landed exactly as intended, striking at Cryosidian pride in a way brute strength never could have. I recognized the tactic immediately, understanding that Nathan had studied our culture carefully enough to know exactly which pressure point would force HFY's hand. "Fine," HFY finally said, contempt barely masking something closer to uncertainty. "We accept these terms, but do not expect mercy when your fragile bodies fail to keep pace with Cryosidian efficiency." The channel closed, leaving the bridge in tense silence. "That was either brilliant, Doran said quietly beside me, or the most foolish thing I have witnessed since this entire encounter began? Perhaps both, I admitted. The abandoned station drifted just within range of both vessels, its structure clearly ancient, damaged by decades of neglect and slow decay. Multiple sections showed signs of critical failure, atmosphere leaking steadily from breaches scattered throughout its hull. According to sensor readings, several life signs remained trapped inside, faint and fading, survivors of some earlier disaster whose rescue had apparently never come. Two teams prepared for extraction, Cryosidian warriors moving with brutal efficiency toward the station's largest breach, while Nathan assembled a much smaller human team, myself included at my own insistence, toward a more complex section requiring careful navigation through unstable corridors. "You want me on your team," I said as we suited up, "despite everything my people represent." "You know this station's construction style better than any of us," Nathan said. "Your intelligence reports apparently included plenty of information about outposts like this one. Doesn't matter what species built the knowledge, if it helps us save people faster." I found myself oddly moved by this response, by the willingness to use whatever advantage existed, regardless of its origin, without hesitation or suspicion. The rescue began the moment both teams breached their respective sections, and I quickly understood exactly what Nathan had intended by proposing this trial instead of direct combat. The Cryosidian team moved with incredible speed, their strength allowing them to tear through debris and structural damage that would have taken any human crew significant time to clear manually. Within minutes, they had reached the first group of survivors, extracting them with brutal efficiency despite obvious rough handling that caused additional injury during the process. Our team moved differently entirely. Slower, certainly, lacking the raw physical strength to simply tear through obstacles. But Laura Whitfield carried equipment capable of stabilizing structural damage before attempting extraction, while Owen Hale monitored vital signs continuously, adjusting our approach based on each survivor's specific condition, rather than applying uniform force regardless of circumstance. "This section is unstable," Laura called out as we approached a group of 3 survivors trapped behind a collapsed support beam. "If we clear this, the way the Cryosidian team is doing it, the whole section could come down on top of them. Then we do it differently," I said, surprising myself with how naturally the words came. Together, using tools designed for precision rather than brute force, we carefully redistributed the structural load before attempting extraction, a process that took considerably longer than the Cryosidian team's approach, but resulted in survivors pulled free without additional injury. By the time our team completed the rescue, extracting all 3 survivors safely, word came through that the Cryosidian team had already returned to their vessel with their own group of survivors, moving faster overall despite the rough handling involved. "They finished first," Doran said, meeting us as we returned to Halden's Reach. "Speed alone determines efficiency, does it not?" I did not answer immediately, waiting instead for the medical reports to confirm what I already suspected based on what I had witnessed firsthand. The reports arrived within the hour, and the results silenced even Doran's usual confidence. Every survivor extracted by the Cryosidian team required extensive additional medical treatment, injuries sustained not from the original disaster, but from the rescue process itself, rough handling causing fractures, and internal damage that would extend recovery time significantly. Every survivor extracted by the human team required no additional treatment beyond what their original injuries already demanded. Speed without care creates new problems even while solving old ones, Nathan said quietly, reviewing the reports alongside HFY's own medical officer through the shared channel. "That's not efficiency. That's just moving fast without thinking about consequences." HFY's voice, when it finally responded, carried none of its earlier confidence. "Your team completed the task slower," he said, though the accusation lacked its previous conviction. "We completed it without causing additional harm," Nathan replied. "If the goal was actually saving lives, rather than just proving who's physically stronger, I'd say that matters more than speed alone." Silence stretched across the channel again, longer this time than any pause during our entire encounter. "This is not how strength is measured," HFY finally said, though his voice carried something I had never heard from him before: genuine uncertainty. "Maybe it should be," Nathan said. "Strength that only knows how to break things isn't worth much when the goal is keeping people alive." I stepped forward then, unable to remain silent any longer. "Commander," I said, addressing HFY directly, "I have spent days aboard this vessel, witnessing everything this species represents. Their bodies are fragile, exactly as our reports claimed. But their strength was never meant to live inside individual bodies. It lives in how they work together, how they build systems capable of surviving individual failure, how they extend help even toward those capable of destroying them without effort." "You speak as though you have joined their cause," HFY said, something dangerous creeping into his tone. "I speak as someone who nearly died aboard a failing vessel," I said, "and was saved by a species we dismissed as unworthy of respect. I speak as someone who has watched them save strangers without calculating personal cost, build cooperation across billions of individuals, and now outperform trained Cryosidian warriors at the exact task meant to prove their inferiority." HFY said nothing for a long moment, and I could sense the entire bridge holding its breath alongside me, waiting to see whether pride would override everything logic had just demonstrated. "This changes nothing about Cryosidian superiority," HFY finally said, though his voice had lost the absolute certainty it carried during our first encounter. "Perhaps not everything," I said, "but it changes enough that continued hostility serves no purpose beyond satisfying pride that has already been proven misplaced." Another long silence followed, and I found myself uncertain which direction HFY would choose. Everything in Cryosidian culture demanded he respond to this challenge to his authority with overwhelming force, restoring dominance through whatever means necessary. Yet something in the silence suggested he understood, perhaps for the first time, that overwhelming force alone would prove nothing beyond what the rescue trial had already demonstrated far more clearly. "What do you propose instead?" HFY finally asked, addressing Nathan directly, "if not continued conflict?" Nathan glanced toward me briefly before answering, and I understood he was offering me the choice of how to frame what came next. "I propose alliance," I said, stepping into the moment fully. "Not because humanity has proven weaker than we believed, but because they have proven strength exists in forms our culture never bothered to measure. A species capable of building cooperation this resilient, sustaining it across billions of individuals, extending it even toward potential threats, is not a species worth conquering." "Then what are they worth?" HFY asked, though the question carried genuine curiosity now, rather than mockery. "They are worth learning from," I said, "and worth having beside us, rather than against us, should true danger ever threaten either of our peoples." The silence that followed felt different from every pause before it, less charged with tension, more weighted with genuine consideration. "This will not be an easy proposal to bring before Cryosidian High Command," HFY finally said. "Our entire culture measures worth through combat superiority. Proposing alliance with a species that just outperformed trained warriors through methods we do not fully understand will not be received easily." "Then perhaps it is time our culture learned to measure worth differently," I said, "before we make an enemy of a species whose true strength we have not yet begun to understand." HFY did not respond immediately, and I understood this decision would not be settled within a single conversation. But something had shifted permanently during this encounter, a crack forming in assumptions my people had carried for as long as our history extended. "I will bring your proposal before High Command," HFY finally said. "Whether they choose to listen remains uncertain." "That's all any of us can ask," Nathan said. "A chance to be understood, rather than immediately dismissed." The Cryosidian vessel withdrew slowly afterward, disappearing back into the dark it had emerged from hours earlier, carrying with it a proposal that would likely spark fierce debate among a species unaccustomed to questioning its own foundational beliefs. I remained aboard Halden's Reach, uncertain what awaited me once I returned to my own people, uncertain whether this fragile alliance would survive the scrutiny of Creosidian pride. But standing beside Nathan Pierce, Grace Bennett, and every human who had shown me a definition of strength I had never encountered before, I understood something with absolute clarity that no amount of Cryosidian tradition could erase. We had arrived expecting to find a species weak enough to dismiss without consequence. Instead, we had found a species whose fragile bodies concealed a resilience far more dangerous than any claw or venom my people had ever evolved, a strength built not from individual survival, but from a refusal to abandon anyone, stranger or ally, when the moment demanded courage instead of calculation. Creosidians had spent our entire history believing only the strongest individual deserved to survive. Humanity had spent theirs proving that survival was never meant to belong to individuals at all. And as our two vessels drifted apart, carrying uncertain futures back toward our separate worlds, I found myself hoping, for the first time in my life, that my own people would prove wise enough to learn what I had learned aboard a ship far too fragile to matter, crewed by a species far too weak to survive. They had survived anyway, and in doing so, they had shown me that the galaxy's true measure of strength had never been about what a body could endure alone. It had always been about what a species chooses to become, together, when every calculation says giving up would be so much easier. Humanity chose otherwise, and I suspected, as our ship finally turned back toward Creosidian space, that this choice would echo across the stars, far longer than any war my people had ever fought to prove our own strength.